Marie Laveau, the Voodoo queen who still answers from the grave in New Orleans. Petitioners still mark her tomb with X's and claim the Queen of Voodoo delivers results even in death. Long before the city of New Orleans became synonymous with ghosts and hauntings, before the tour and the television shows and the commercialized mythology of the haunted South, there existed a woman whose power during her lifetime was so undeniable that it refused to be contained by the grave. Marie Laveau was born in 1801 into a world that most modern observers struggle to comprehend. A free woman of color in a city where freedom existed on a spectrum rather than as a binary condition, where the category of the free black Creole carved out social possibilities that existed almost nowhere else in the antebellum United States. New Orleans in the early 19th century operated according to rules that the rest of the country did not recognize, a place where African spiritual traditions maintained their hold even as French Catholicism provided the official religious framework, where racial categories blurred in ways that plantation society further north could not tolerate. Marie Laveau's official profession was hairdresser. This occupation, which might seem unremarkable to contemporary observers, granted her access to spaces that were otherwise completely closed to women of her background. She moved through the private chambers of New Orleans' white elite, attending to wealthy women in their boudoirs and bedrooms, present during conversations that were never meant for outside ears. The intelligence she gathered through this intimate access was formidable. She knew who was having financial difficulties before the banks knew. She knew about affairs before spouses discovered them. She knew about planned business ventures, political machinations, family disputes, and personal secrets that the city's most powerful families assumed were safely hidden behind closed doors. This information became currency in a different kind of economy, one where Marie Laveau operated as the acknowledged leader of voodoo practice in a city where voodoo was not a fringe belief system, but a living tradition with roots that reached back to West Africa and branched forward into a uniquely American synthesis. From at least the 1820s onward, Marie Laveau served as the spiritual authority to whom both black and white New Orleanians turned when they needed intervention that the official channels of church, law, and commerce could not provide. Her practice was documented in newspaper accounts, court records, and personal correspondence that reference her both with hostility and with grudging respect. The hostility came primarily from those who saw her influence as a threat to the established social order. The respect came from those who had witnessed what she could accomplish. She led public ceremonies at Congo Square, the only place in North America where enslaved people were permitted to gather for their own cultural practices on Sunday afternoons. These gatherings drew hundreds of participants and white spectators who came to watch from what they believed was a safe distance. Some of them did not maintain that distance. Some of them came not as observers, but as petitioners. What made Marie Laveau genuinely anomalous in the documented history of American religious practice was the breadth of her clientele. She served wealthy white merchants and enslaved black washerwomen. She served politicians seeking electoral advantage and mothers seeking lost children. She served free people of color navigating the precarious space between enslavement and full citizenship. Her fees varied according to what her clients could pay. The wealthy paid in money and in information that she could use to help others. The poor paid what they had, and when they had nothing, she sometimes asked for nothing at all. This was not charity in the conventional sense. This was the operation of a spiritual economy where debts and obligations functioned according to rules that the dominant culture did not recognize but could not entirely dismiss. The range and effectiveness of her practice gave Marie Laveau a form of power that the official power structures of New Orleans recognized and feared. City officials who would publicly have denied any belief in voodoo privately sought her intervention. Lawyers consulted her before important trials. Businessmen asked for her blessing before major ventures. Women came to her with problems their husbands could not solve and secrets their confessors would not hear. She delivered results. The documentation makes this clear. Court cases that should have been lost were won. Business ventures that should have failed succeeded. People who had been given up for lost were found. The mechanisms by which these results were achieved remain subject to interpretation. Believers attribute them to genuine spiritual power. Skeptics point to her intelligence network and her strategic use of information. Both explanations acknowledge the same fundamental reality. Marie Laveau got things done. She also led ceremonies on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain on St. John's Eve, the night before the feast of St. John the Baptist, when the boundary between the Catholic calendar and the Voodoo calendar collapsed into a single celebration that drew participants from across the city. These gatherings were documented by observers who described dancing that lasted until dawn, offerings left at the water's edge, and a ritual intensity that unsettled those who witnessed it from outside the tradition. Marie Laveau presided over these ceremonies with absolute authority, a figure who commanded respect from participants who ranged from recent arrivals from Haiti to third-generation New Orleans Creoles to white thrill-seekers who came looking for spectacle and sometimes found genuine transformation. Marie Laveau passed away in 1881 at the age of 80. She was buried in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, the oldest cemetery in New Orleans, in a tomb that belonged to the Glapion family. Within years of her burial, her tomb became one of the most visited sites in the city. Petitioners began leaving offerings and marking the tomb with X's, a practice whose exact origin remains unclear, but whose persistence is undeniable. The protocol, as it has been passed down through oral tradition, requires the petitioner to mark 3 X's on the tomb, knock 3 times, state their petition aloud, and leave an offering. If the petition is granted, the petitioner is obligated to return and circle their X's. The tomb is covered in these marks. They accumulate faster than weathering can erase them. Researchers who have attempted to document the paranormal phenomena associated with Marie Laveau's tomb face a challenge that is common in cases where spiritual practice and folk tradition intersect with documented history. The woman herself cultivated her own legend with deliberate skill. She understood that mystique was a form of power and that the stories people told about her abilities amplified those abilities in a feedback loop where reputation and reality became difficult to separate. After her death, her daughter, also named Marie Laveau, also a voodoo practitioner, continued her work, and the city's collective memory conflated mother and daughter into a single figure whose lifespan seemed to extend far beyond natural limits. By the time researchers like Robert Tallant, Martha Ward, and Carolyn Morrow Long began the work of separating historical fact from accumulated legend, they were dealing with more than a century of myth-making. But the paranormal documentation does not depend on separating myth from history. It depends on documenting what continues to happen, and what continues to happen at Marie Laveau's tomb is consistent and ongoing. Petitioners leave offerings of rum, cigars, flowers, coins, and personal items. They leave written requests. They leave photographs of people they want the Queen to help or harm. They report that their petitions are answered. The tomb has been vandalized repeatedly, not by hostile actors, but by the accumulated weight of devotion, marked and remarked, until the stone itself has been damaged by the very reverence directed toward it. The Archdiocese of New Orleans, which owns and maintains St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, has attempted multiple times to regulate access to the tomb, to prohibit the leaving of offerings, to remove the X marks. These efforts have never been successful for long. The practice continues. The danger associated with Marie Laveau's legacy is not the danger of malevolent haunting. She was not, in her documented practice, an indiscriminately destructive force. The voodoo tradition she embodied makes careful distinctions between healing and harm, between justice and vengeance. Marie Laveau delivered both, but she delivered them with intention. The harm she caused was targeted, directed at specific people who had wronged specific petitioners in specific ways. The danger in approaching her tomb without understanding this is the danger that attaches to all genuine power, that those who invoke it may not be prepared for what they receive, that they may ask for things they do not truly want, that they may direct harm toward people who do not deserve it, and discover that the Queen does not approve of petitions made in bad faith. Nothing about Marie Laveau has been removed. The practice at her tomb continues despite official disapproval, despite repeated attempts at regulation, despite the confusion that has sometimes directed petitioners to the wrong tomb when they cannot distinguish between the markers for Marie Laveau and her daughter. The tradition she embodied, New Orleans Voodoo, a synthesis of West African Vaudou, Haitian Voodoo, French Catholic devotional practice, and the specific spiritual innovations of the free Black Creole community, did not perish with her. It continues to be practiced by people who trace their spiritual lineage to the woman who made Congo Square the center of American voodoo for half a century. Marie Laveau's legacy in the paranormal and spiritual landscape of New Orleans is absolute. She remains the gravitational center around which the city's entire tradition of documented spiritual practice orbits. Her name is invoked by contemporary practitioners who want to claim authority. Her intercession is sought by petitioners who come to her tomb with needs that range from the desperate to the mundane. She is the subject of ongoing academic research, popular biography, fictional adaptation, and spiritual devotion that shows no sign of diminishing a century and a half after her death. The X marks accumulate on her tomb every day. The offerings are left and replenished, and the Queen, by the consistent testimony of people who approach her grave with genuine need and genuine faith, continues to answer. If you found this case compelling, subscribe to Vanishing Roads for more documented paranormal investigations from around the world. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented case files. All events reference real investigations and reported incidents.